I don't understand why Chuck Schumer is still in charge of the Democrat Party. He's too old. He's stuck in the world that he grew up in.
We'll see if it actually happens. Hopefully it does. Hopefully we don't have some sort of constitutional crisis where we just say fuck you to the judicial branch.
I wasn't paying attention to politics at that time because I was in the surge in Afghanistan.
And the government doesn't even make any profit, so it's just people sucking money right out of the system, tax dollars, whatever.
Realistically, you have no power, you have no cards to play, you have no hand.
The evidence is in the numbers. In 2024, Democrats lost ground with every race of working class voters.
Even if the government doesn't shut down, even if they just think that it might shut down, everyone stops working. It's just a huge waste of time. These people will take any excuse to not work, to be honest. Hi everybody, this is John Back from Real Veteran News. This is Real Veteran News 45, and I'd like to remind everybody to please watch the entire show and leave a comment if you want to help out the channel. Thanks a lot. So this week we narrowly avoided the government shutdown, and I want to talk about the shutdown and strategy and everything like that. I already recorded the rest of the show with friends, and I understand most people are not from the DC area, right? And so I'm from this area, basically from government family, government neighborhood, government area of the country here. And I've been around for these shutdowns. I've worked for the government, the army, and the government for most of my life. And I have to say that these shutdowns and even the shutdown scare that comes up, and we learn to not take it that seriously. It's kind of like in Florida when there's a hurricane coming, and everyone's like, oh, another hurricane. But sometimes the hurricane hits, sometimes the earthquake, the big one in California hits. And in this part of the country, it's these shutdowns. And it is sort of a symptom of dysfunctional politics. It's part of the politics of but there are a lot of federal contractors that don't get back pay. Some don't make that much money. They're living paycheck to paycheck. They've got families, thin budgets. We know how much the cost of living is these days. Nobody wants this stuff. It slows down services. I will say when the government shuts down, for the week leading up to it, and I don't know how long it takes to get things back online, but everybody stops working. Everything grinds to a halt. Even if the government doesn't shut down, even if they just think that it might shut down, everyone stops working. It's just a huge waste of time. These people will take any excuse to not work, to be honest. And it sucks. So I've had several experiences with government shutdowns. I'd say the first one was when I was in the Army. I think it was in 2011. And I don't really know what happened because I wasn't paying attention to politics at that time because I was in the surge in Afghanistan. But it was around, the time when bin Laden got killed. And they told us, yeah, the government might shut down. It did shut down. They shuffled some money around. They ended up, I guess they felt guilty. They ended up paying us half paychecks. They eventually paid us back or whatever. But, it's just insane. We were out there. We were just looking at each other, we're in our 20s. And it's we're the ones out here fighting. We're happy to do it. But it's we're out here fighting. We're up for missions. I still have to go on a mission tonight. People would joke around and be like, okay, well, I'm not getting paid on Friday or whenever it is. Do I still have to go on a mission? What? Obviously we did. We still went on missions. But, you still have to keep fighting. And you don't have an option. And these young people that are at the tip of the spear in special operations or in regular combat operations or just serving in the military in a non-combat capacity, it's they're sacrificing a lot. They're putting themselves out there, and then they don't get paid or whatever. And I think they've changed it now. I think after that, where they passed some law that updated it, but I went through that, and I know it was temporary, and it's just games that these guys play, and the country wasn't bankrupt, and the country did respect us and whatever. They were just going through something at that time. But, it looks like shit. The second one that I really remember was in 2013, after Obamacare came in, Ted Cruz orchestrated filibuster, and then they shut the government down from the Republican Senate to protest Obamacare, which is they were never going to repeal Obamacare. The Democrats just sat back and were okay, the Republicans got crushed. John McCain famously said, by the end of it, we're down to paid staff and blood relatives at this point in the polls. I mean, congressional Republican approval was in the teens, I think, at that point. They haven't bounced back or whatever, but I mean, it was just ridiculous. I had 2 businesses in like the Maryland area back then, 2 CrossFit gyms. My main CrossFit gym that I started by myself went from signing up about 15 people to signing up 1 person. And people just stopped spending money. I didn't really lose any clients there. But in my second gym that was closer to the NSA, we had a lot of NSA people who weren't working and weren't getting paid. And just the area, didn't support at the same level. We went from signing up about 7 to 8 people every like 2 or 3 weeks to signing up no people and losing members to the point where we were breaking even roughly at that point, going to where we were losing money. And, I was a veteran, my business partner was a veteran, and we were essentially having to pay the rent on this warehouse out of our own income because the government, our clients who were happy, satisfied clients, were not coming to the gym anymore because they couldn't afford it. They needed to cut their expenses because they had other priorities. And it basically really damaged that gym. It wasn't good for my main CrossFit gym, and so on. I mean, during the Trump shutdown, it was also not great. It was a very dreary time back in DC during this time in 2018. And not even just the shutdowns, just all the little almost shutdowns, or, it shuts down for 48 hours or 24 hours over the weekend. And most people in the country don't realize it, but, it sucks. And when these things do happen, these contractors get hammered the most. I mean, for the federal employees, it's like a vacation, basically. They don't get paid, but then they get back pay, so they never really lose any money, and they don't have to go to work. So, I don't know. I mean, it's a mixed bag. I wish they didn't have to do this, but, if they didn't negotiate this type of stuff, they would just spend money totally out of control. And I'm not like a big Doge head, but I do understand that the government would go out of control on spending money if they didn't have to negotiate the debt ceiling, if they didn't have to negotiate the budget, and so on. So basically, the Democrats backed down in the Senate, and Chuck Schumer was threatening to kind of bring this filibuster, rally his troops, and block the bill that would keep the government open. But it's realistically, you have no power, you have no cards to play, you have no hand. Usually Republicans get blamed, but at this time, they're dominating in the media, the electorate has shifted, you don't control any part of the government, and there's no end game. Even if you shut the government down, what are you negotiating for? I mean, they're not going to stop doing what they're doing. And they'd be perfectly happy to shut the government down because then they could say they're saving even more money. And then they could go in and start cutting the government even more when all the inspectors and everybody are not at work. And they can just be like, okay, you're never coming back. And it'd be incumbent on them to start these agencies back up once the government got started up again. They might never bring these people back to work. So it was a dumb idea in the first place. I'm glad they didn't go through with it. I don't understand why Chuck Schumer is still in charge of the Democrat Party. He's too old. He's stuck in the world that he grew up in, which happens with a lot of people. And I sometimes question myself, am I stuck in the world that I grew up in? I try to live in the now and understand the way the world is now. I'm still relatively young. I don't know how it'll be when I'm in my 70s or whatever, but these people are too old. He thinks it's the 80s. He's just like Biden. He thinks it's the 80s, and it's not. Right? You Democrats need to get rid of these old people. You need to get rid of these old men. You need to get control of your extreme online base with the megaphone. And I'm not saying turn the party to the center, but just moderate it and make it so you don't look so ridiculous all the time. And you just need more leaders that are men, normal men. You're not going to be able to get the working class back, the average voter that you lost, the young people, without sidelining some of these extreme liberal women. They have no appeal. I'm an independent and I don't vote because I think the system's bullshit, but as an independent, if I did vote, I can say that these extremists are not appealing at all. The Republicans, not great either, but some of them seem more normal. Their behavior seems more normal than the extreme people and on the liberal side. At least from my perspective. I am, from my frame and everything, I get that. But new leaders, get some younger people, get some more men. Hakeem Jeffries is doing a pretty good job. James Carville is right. Like, you can't really do anything right now. You just got to let things play out the way they play out and play politics when you get the chance. You've got to obviously win 26. I've said this before, but like, if you don't win the House back in 26, your party's dead. That's the fact of the matter. Resistance politics isn't going to work. You tried resistance politics in 17, 18, 19. It worked back then. Trump wasn't really ready for it, didn't know how to respond, but he's had a lot of time to think about it. And he's retooled. He's got new people, and they're not going to allow the resistance anymore. So you've got to find a new way of doing things. You've got to regain statutory legislative power, which is going to take some time. And in the meantime, you have to behave yourself in a way to set yourself up to win electorally so you can regain some measure of power. Like right now, you just have no hand to play. All right, everybody, it's time to start up the conversation with my veteran Marine friend, John Jackson, Democrat political extraordinaire. How are you doing tonight, John?
I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
My name is John Jackson. I'm a former Democratic political consultant, but I am a United States Marine Corps veteran. I live in Miami, Florida.
You're not smoking a cigar tonight?
You know, I might light one up pretty soon. I got one to the side of me, but yeah, I've taken a little break.
Some little Bill Clinton action? All right, so the topic tonight is we're going to talk about Democrat politics. John was quoted in some media recently. He's got some opinions about the future of the Democrat Party, and he's sticking to his guns. So I want to talk about that and just Democrats in general. I did it before, though. I want to ask you, I was reading a book about Vietnam. You're one of the only Marines I know, and there was some stuff about the Marines in Vietnam at Khe Sanh, which I didn't know much about because it was before my time, right? First off, there's a joke back then, a Marine joke I thought you might like. All right, so what is the difference between the Marine Corps and the Boy Scouts?
What's that?
The Boy Scouts have adult leadership. I honestly didn't really get it, but I'm like reading this book about Vietnam, and then like when I thought about it, I was like, holy fuck. Oh, Jesus. All right. And this was like written before we were even born, right? I don't mean to get too dark here, but another interesting thing that I thought about in here was they said at the time, this is in the 1960s, they were saying, this is basically the Marines talking about. It says, the Corps came to be called by many the finest instrument ever devised for the killing of young Americans. Do you know much about Vietnam and Marine history?
I know a little bit. I know that during the Vietnam era, they shortened basic training so they could hurry up and get them out there. They made basic training at Parris Island 8 weeks. Oh, you know, we learned about the battles and basic training, and particularly Wave City, which was the biggest urban house-to-house, street-to-street combat in history at that time.
Yeah, so I'm reading this book. It's called Dispatches. It was gifted to me by my stepfather, who was in the Army, but was in Vietnam. And it's just a lot. I'm just processing it. I'm not even done with Khe Sanh, but I just want to bring that up, see what you think. But honestly, fucked up, and they should have treated all the younger people, Army, and especially those Marines that got hit really hard in Vietnam. And I live near the Vietnam Memorial, and it just means more to me now that I've been reading about this. So
the way our country did Vietnam vets, it was truly disgraceful. Absolutely, I agree with you.
Yeah, tough, modern, semi-modern war. Okay. All right, so Democrat politics. We're going to get into Democrat politics. I'll let you go first. I know that the issue that you've been talking to others about in the media was around Democrats losing touch with middle-class, working-class people, focusing on niche issues or whatever. So what do you think, and what do you think about, you know, the reaction to your views as a Democrat?
I think the evidence is in the numbers. In 2024, Democrats lost grounds with every race of working class voters. That means they lost ground with black working class voters. They lost ground with Hispanic working class voters, white working class voters, Asian working class voters. It didn't matter what race you are. If you were a non-college educated American, you were voting Democrat in lesser numbers. That is something where the Democratic Party has to look internally and say, where is our message failing? And I worked in Democratic politics, and it can be a liberal bubble, an upper middle class liberal bubble, where they're messaging to their liberal enclave that's already coming out and voting Democrat. And so one of the ways Trump won is Trump was able to win, well, not win, but outperform in traditionally Democratic areas, and he won 3 out of the top 10 largest counties in America, which includes Maricopa, Miami-Dade County, and Riverside County in California. And he ran competitive in a lot of other blue strongholds because the Democrats were just fucking up their message of the working class, and they just can't get out of the thought of their bubble. And so one of the things I've reminded Democrats on when it comes to the whole transgender policy issue, I believe in humane treatment, and I believe in equality. I believe in being compassionate, but at the same time, when you focus on that issue, you give life to the right-wing culture wars. They recently passed a bill in Georgia that banned transgender girls from girls' sports there. Guess how many times that's happened in Georgia? 0 times. But if Democrats hadn't been up in arms fighting it and just kind of let the thing die, they wouldn't be getting any negative press. It wouldn't be a huge issue. They also do a horrible job. I actually spoke to the sponsor of the bill. He's a veteran. He's a former Army Ranger himself, Representative David Clark, good guy. I asked him, I said, how many transgender girls have competed in girls' sports in Georgia? He couldn't answer me. And none of his supporters could answer me because it hasn't happened. It is a blown out of proportion thing, but I'm going to say this. Most of the Democratic base agrees with Republicans on this. The difference with Republicans, they make it an election strategy, and when it becomes the center of conversation, Democrats lose because Democrats they freeze, they can't take a stance. When they do take a stance, it's often out of touch with what the base wants. And I don't think they should take the same stance as the Republicans. Whether you're going to go against it or go for it, you need to reveal that this is not a crisis. This is a fake crisis. It does cause a problem sometimes, but this is not a crisis. And so I think that the Democrats are just, the cowardice shows. They're going to have to be more bold and speak up and actually tailor their agenda and their message to the working class, not to upper middle class, wealthy, yuppie liberals.
All right, yes, that sounds like how our conversation's been going and how you were quoted in the press, but that was in print, so it's good to get on video here. All right, so in the 2024 election, when Trump and Harris were going head-to-head, they had a very effective slogan that they used on a commercial. I wasn't in a swing state, so I didn't see a lot of this, but it was, Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for you. And I personally think that's effective, and I think it will go down as one of the more effective slogans out there. What do you think about that slogan, what it had effect on the election?
I think it had a profound effect. I think the reality is, and I've been told this by LGBTQ plus people themselves, the pronoun thing evolves and changes a lot. It's very academic. It's very elitist. It's very liberal, upper middle class enclave. Even working class people who identify as something else, who identify as something not straight, aren't always up on all that stuff. And so I think it's a mistake for liberals to overemphasize that. And the reality is it gets overemphasized because upper middle class, wealthy liberals, mostly white, they want to feel good about themselves. So they choose their pet issues that they virtue signal on, but they seem to really actually evade issues that are really important to the working class. Basically, your basic needs, your economic needs, education, healthcare, and public safety. That's what it comes down to. And I think they make it overly trivial, but the reality is the symptom here is elitism. It's just a big, big problem with elitism, and I've seen it firsthand.
So the pronouns for me as an independent person, I actually find the pronouns to be helpful when it's apt. You see a person, you don't really know what they got going on. You're just meeting them, or you're in a class, or you're in some group environment. Their clothes don't match what they were probably born as. Maybe their hair looks different. It kind of helps if they're like, hey, my pronouns are this or this, whatever. Like, because that's, how the fuck am I supposed to know what to? Usually we just like assume, obviously. So I personally think that there's a basis for it, but it gets taken a step further where it's like there's this expectation that as someone who doesn't really need to proclaim their pronouns or like specify their pronouns, that if you don't also specify your pronouns, even though it's patently obvious what my pronouns are, I'm 40 years old, cis guy, that I'm somehow against everybody else or whatever. It's just like a little ridiculous. I know some people do it and some people feel comfortable with it. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me one way or the other, but it just feels silly. And it's like roping me into something that I'm not a part of. Like, I don't have really anything to do with that. I'm perfectly happy to call someone whatever they want to be called. I mean, who cares, really? But it makes the people who are like driving that orthodoxy seem out of touch and unreasonable from my perspective.
Yeah, it absolutely. And you got to understand, we're both guys with master's level degree education. We're very educated guys. We're not the people. Yes, the Democratic Party is struggling with men, but they're struggling with men who are working class, people who are working class the most, period. So imagine a guy who works at the steel mill. Imagine your African American barber. Imagine your construction worker, how they react to this. It's perplexing to them. It wouldn't be as perplexing to them if we're being messaged more about things they care about and being messaged in a way that resonates with them. But they are messaging, the Democratic Party messaging is catered to, it's as if you're speaking to an upper middle class yuppie liberal white woman who lives in a gentrified area and drinks lattes every day and has avocado toast. And that's who the messaging is catered to. And so you're not going to maximize African American turnout that way. In fact, the Republicans will pick off black voters that way. You're not going to resonate with the majority working class Hispanic community, and you're definitely not going to get white independents who a lot of them are working class, a lot of them are more blue collar. And so I think, I'm not saying we shouldn't respect people and we should not call people what they want to be called. I think it's hilarious when right wingers let transgender people and people who are not traditional gender wise live rent free in their head. It's such a small percentage of the population. And I'm like, you mad, bro? Like, this is a small percentage of the population. And this seems to be like half of what you talk about. It's a little weird to me. Like, it is a little weird. But I also think, Democrats and liberals play into that when they let it occupy a disproportionate amount of our conversation bandwidth.
Yeah, I think, and I had this similar discussion with Mark Peterson last weekend, and I get the argument that it's only a few people and it's, this or that. But coming from the conservative side of the view where they want to stamp it out or deal with it on their terms, I feel like they're saying everyone knows it's very minority. Like, everyone knows that. But it's like changing the rules of the game. But like, you're changing the rules of the Monopoly game. And it's like, this is our country. We're the traditional party or whatever. Like, you're not going to do this. We're going to fight you on this. And if we have the power, we're just going to like put our foot down and be like, no, because we think it's stupid. We don't want our kids growing up like this. And they think it's ridiculous. And in cases, like, you get this like libs of TikTok, you cherry pick these examples. It's ridiculous. But on the other side, you find these extremely vulnerable trans people who like they can't get a job other than being like a sex worker, and they live this horrible life, and it's like more likely than not that they kill themselves, and we feel sorry for them, and it's like both sides of this thing or whatever. All right, some electoral stuff, right? All right, so you were mentioning the Democrat Party is changing. I personally think the Democrat Party has essentially been taken over by women for the most part, and it's really changed a lot. You also have this shift to like a more educated population with the Democrats. I saw in one of the articles I was researching for this, they pointed out that in the last 30 years, basically since the mid 90s, that the percentage of Democrat Party with just a high school degree has gone from 55% to 25%, which is a huge shift, right? So you've got a lot more influence of this higher education and higher education and politics. They're also saying that this migration from blue states to red states could flip the electoral college towards the Republicans and the House races towards the Republicans significantly after the 2030 census, to the point where Democrats basically can't win anymore, at least in the Electoral College and probably also in the House too. And then the last thing that I noticed was that they were saying that whenever they're torn between like the online donors where they get most of their money from these small people giving like 20-50 bucks on a website, Act Blue or whatever, and then the white working class voters that they need them to vote to round out their coalition. But the working class people aren't really voting because they're a lot of times living paycheck to paycheck, or they're not giving money into politics. And so the messaging is going in two different ways, and they don't find an electoral benefit to attacking towards the center. I mean, they don't get more votes basically if they go to the center. What do you think about like the shifting politics of that?
I don't think it's a conversation of center or left. Obviously, I don't think Democrats should be running as socialist, but I think it's more about messaging, communicating, than it is about ideology. It's really because Bernie Sanders had a lot of crossover with Trump. And Bernie Sanders is considered to be the far left of Congress, the far left of the Senate. But the thing about Bernie is Bernie messages people in a way that's relatable, that resonates with everyday people's issues, whether you're liberal, whether you're moderate. And that's why so many folks who voted for Bernie Sanders are now Trump voters, particularly males. You know, Joe Rogan is not the only one. And so I think that, and one of the things I have to say about Bernie is Bernie focuses on those kitchen table issues, those economics, education, healthcare. He focuses on issues that the working class are going to be thinking about. He doesn't bring up the polarizing issues nearly as much as your mainstream liberal does. And so I think whether you're a moderate or you're a liberal or you're like one of the squad Democrats, I think Bernie Sanders has laid it out how you can appeal to people of different walks of life.
You know, but he's too old, and well, he can't. Black people are probably not going to vote for him. I mean, right?
Right. Absolutely. He does not know how to message to black people. That was one of his problems. But I do think that there are folks. You get a different messenger. You get a different person, and it absolutely would work. So I'm saying I don't think Bernie Sanders is the answer. He is too old. But I think Bernie Sanders, if the Democratic Party would listen, he could teach them a lot on what issues to kind of emphasize.
Okay, the last thing I'm interested in, obviously, is 2028. You know, America's all about presidential politics, and we're already thinking about it. It basically never ends. The two men, essentially, Kamala Harris is like leading at 33%. But
that's not going to happen.
That's basically probably like name recognition at this point. There's been this news. It was like James Carville and Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith, people are saying he might run. I mean, potentially he might, honestly. Why wouldn't he if people really want him to? And then obviously Gavin Newsom is skulking around trying to figure out how to trick everybody in the country into voting for him. I personally don't like Gavin Newsom. I think he's a slicky boy. And Stephen A. Smith, I don't really know too much about him. He says he thinks he could beat the Democrats. He obviously doesn't know what Republicans he would have to go against. I do think he could beat the Democrats right now. I do think he could beat Donald Trump Jr. on the Republican side. I think he could beat J.D. Vance. Well, I think he could beat J.D. Vance. What do you think about Stephen A. Smith, Gavin Newsom, and, you know, the lay of the land for 28?
I think Stephen A. Smith would struggle. I don't think this American electorate would elect Obama at this point. And Obama ran one of the two successful campaigns in modern history as far as how diverse his coalition was and how many different types of people he appealed to. But I question if Stephen A. could win a general election as a black person in America. I just don't think that's the mood of the nation. I think he would have a better chance than maybe a lot of establishment politicians because he is not part of the liberal establishment. That would probably get him votes that maybe, you know, your mainstream black liberals might not get. But I still don't know if it would be enough. I really do think that the Democratic Party is probably going back to a white male. Now, you know, obviously not a Joe Biden type, but someone who's younger and more charismatic and who can get back the big elephant in the room. The Democratic Party has been bleeding white voters. And so most people think the best person to get white voters back is a white male candidate. So I think Gavin Newsom is by having all these conservatives on his podcast, he's trying to get conservatives to warm up to him, more conservative leaning people to warm up to him. We'll see if it works. I like Andy Bashir from Kentucky. I think he's a liberal who knows how to message working class people and knows how to relate to people who are not, typical Democratic voters. In a state that Trump won double digits, he's a center left guy who's won 2 elections. I think he's worth a look for the Democratic Party, and I think he can also appeal to the liberal base.
Okay, I haven't seen too much about him, but I trust your prognosis there.
He's going to have to get his name out there a little more, but I think organically he's the best guy we could run.
All right, that's about it for the topic. Do you got any final words?
No, just no. This vodka is good. Red Bull vodka. Strawberry sugar-free strawberry Red Bull vodka.
Get you lubricated, keep the calories down. I like it. All right. Well, that's the end of our discussion here. We're going to get into the debate now. All right, now it's time for the veteran debate portion. We got good old Ranger buddy Brandon Kennemore coming back. Brandon, nice to see you. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hey, Brandon Kennemore, former Ranger, motorman, canine handler, now IT nerd.
Great. It's great to have you back. First topic is going to be the shutdown, which is not going to happen, but we talk about the strategy and everything behind it.
Well, in my eyes, the shutdown it's silly in general. I feel like it's like a political lever that the parties are using to distract us from a real problem. Really, since about 2005, there's really only been 3 shutdowns, and they've all been very short. And the optics of that and the perception of that is it almost really affects nobody. Certainly never affected me. Even when I was in the Army overseas and they said the government was going to shut down, we were going to get our insurance if something happened to us overseas. But that never really came to fruition. Was kind of a scam or a lie just to keep people scared and distracted from what's really happening in politics. So I don't want the government to shut down, obviously. And I think the CR is that great because it's really just adding more to the deficit. And kind of the whole point of the administration was to reduce the deficit. And by passing this, that's not really setting a good precedent for what we're supposed to be doing.
I consider myself a progressive, but I break with my progressive peers who wanted the government to shut down. I don't think that was going anywhere. I don't think that was going to accomplish anything. I don't support government shutdowns. So I find myself rarely actually agreeing with Chuck Schumer, who I don't think is a good Democratic leader. I don't actually know what happens with a government shutdown because the government never shuts down for very long. We just kick the can. There ends up being some compromise, something that gets passed. So I really can't say what the impact is. I don't think it would be good if it, happened for an extended period of time, but I can't say I know what that looks like.
Brandon, we got government contractors wouldn't get paid. We talked about that. What do you think about contractors?
It would suck if there's a shutdown, right? But it's a risk you take when you're taking those jobs. It's a contract. You're working for the government. The government can't even run the post office profitable. So, I mean, you shouldn't be surprised when they shut down because they can't balance a normal budget. So it's just a risk you take as a contractor. It sucks, especially if you have a family, but you should have a savings and maybe a backup plan for when something like this could happen.
John, what do you think about contractors and people that are affected by the shutdown?
I feel for them, and that is one of the reasons I don't support government shutdowns. I really think that you're there to govern. Both parties, you were elected to govern, not to not govern. And you can't govern if the government is not on and working. The thing you're supposed to be providing a budget and providing oversight of.
All right, so now we're going to do the debate on the federal RIF, the reduction in force. John is going to go on this one.
The reality is government workers' salaries is a really small percentage of the federal budget. It is not where the federal waste is, and I think it's kind of cruel to target workers so fast. I think there's a lot that can be cut before you start devastating people's lives. I think that's why I don't agree with the chainsaw approach that DOGE is doing. I know from having an audit background that to review a simple business unit takes longer than what supposedly DOGE is doing correctly. I think that they need to be more thoughtful about this because the reality is some of the Republican base, a lot of the folks who voted for Donald Trump are being hurt by what the administration is doing right now. And that's a fact.
Payroll is the highest expense for any profitable business. So I don't know the actual statistics of what federal payroll is, but I would imagine federal payroll is pretty high for the government as well. So it makes sense to cut And the government doesn't even make any profit. So that's just people sucking money right out of the system, tax dollars, whatever. I think it's probably is smart to have a better plan, not just start cutting people. There should be some sort of plan laid out so people can kind of expect what's going to happen, get a pension, not a pension, but a stipend, right? We don't have to be chaotic about it. We could do it in an organized manner and cut the workforce down, get rid of the bloat. Just like any regular corporation's got a bunch of bloat, the government's got a bunch of bloat in it as well. So it's a bureaucratic system that's only been getting worse. And I feel like within my lifetime, I've been telling myself it would be so great if we could make the government smaller, and we're finally at a point that it seems like maybe it'll happen, but Republicans like to shoot themselves in the foot, so we'll see what happens.
Got two judges saying that Trump has to hire them back. What do you think, John?
Well, according to Vice President J.D. Vance, the administration doesn't have to, follow what court orders from federal judges. So, we'll see if it actually happens. Hopefully it does. Hopefully we don't have some sort of constitutional crisis where we just say fuck you to the judicial branch, but we never know. I think we're in unprecedented times.
All right, Brandon, what do you think about the judges telling him he's got to hire him back?
Yeah, I don't really know the semantics about like the power of the judicial system versus the federal system in this case, but it does seem kind of silly that the CEO or the president of the executive branch doesn't have the power to fire people within his branch of government. So we'll kind of see how it rolls out. It is an interesting topic, and hopefully there isn't a constitutional crisis or some weird fallback over it. But I would be curious to know what the right answer is.
All right. Well, the VA is huge, and they're planning on getting rid of 80,000 people. So, John, what do you think the effects on the VA are going to be?
I mean, I want to know who these staff are. I think obviously you don't want to have understaffed medical units. You want to make sure the hospitals are fully staffed and veterans can be treated. As someone who has been on VA healthcare myself, I definitely wouldn't want to be at an understaffed VA hospital. So honestly, I'm curious to see where these cuts are. I really hope that this doesn't slow down claims, because I don't think claims could get any slower. If anyone has had to do a claim with the VA, I think that's something we can all relate to here on RVN. So honestly, I just want to know where those cuts are. I mean, I think what Doug Collins said, who I think was a decent choice for that role, he said we're basically reducing it to 2019 staff numbers. So hopefully they can operate and get those claims processed and give veterans what they need, and it doesn't affect the medical operation.
Brandon, what about the VA? What do you think about all the veterans that work there, people that we know that rely on the VA?
I personally love the VA. They've been great to me since I've got out. I don't really have any qualms with the services I've been provided. 80,000 seems like a big number, but I'd be curious to know who those personnel are. Just like everything else, there is probably a lot of bloat, and there is a lot of non-veterans working for the VA. What I would love to see is get all the civilians out of there, and then everybody in the VA should be a veteran. That should be a very plausible plan to do. Kick the civilians out, put veterans in that position, and make the VA for exclusively for veterans. So I'd be mostly interested in who's being fired. I don't really agree with getting rid of that many people for the VA, especially if it's going to slow down claims and healthcare for veterans.
I will say I do agree a little bit. Like, I understand some civilians in the VA, but it does sometimes people making a career off of helping veterans when they never served themselves is maybe they're a spouse or something, but yeah, it's not great all the time.
I'm going to say that. You couldn't take the chainsaw approach to that because we're a very, very, very small portion of the population. So you would need to make sure that, however many urologists that the VA needs, that there's enough veteran urologists out there, that there's enough veteran licensed clinical social workers out there, whatever type of staff you need. And over time, I think you could set a benchmark, you could set a goal that we want the VA to be 75% veterans or 80%, whatever. I absolutely agree with that. And if you're not a veteran and you're trying to work for the VA, you better be damn good at what you do. You got to be the top of the top. Know what the hell you're doing. Otherwise, the veteran is going to go to the front of the line and get in that job.
There's not that many veteran doctors. So, because you got to go to med school when you're young. So you're in the military. So
there's plenty of military doctors, though. Why can't they roll into those positions when they retire and get out?
They probably don't want to. You know what I'm saying?
They're probably making bank.
VA physicians are some of the best paid in the whole VA system. You can go, that's all public information.
Private practice doctors make way more than the VA. Last topic is the Trump tariffs that are going into effect and the retaliation. Brandon's going to start on this.
I'm not an economist or anything to that sort, but it does seem somewhat logical to try to in order to bring manufacturing back into the United States is to do tariffs. And it does seem pretty unfair on some of the tariffs that we get charged from other companies or other countries. For example, 60 to 100% tariff on automobiles and motorcycles in India, or a 270% tariff on milk and cheese. So I think there's definitely needs to be some work done on our trading around the world. I think tariffs are a good lever there. I think it will disrupt the market and prices for a little bit, but I think it's not about a 6-month plan; it's about a 4-year plan. And I think in 4 years, with the plan that's been laid out in front, I think in 4 years we'll be looking pretty good. And I think the reciprocal tax thing is also a pretty good idea. If people want to try to put new tariffs on us, we would immediately just mirror that. So we'll see.
10 to 20 years ago, you couldn't have told anybody that the Republicans would be pro-tariffs and the Democrats would be against tariffs. It's a bizarre world we are living in right now. I'm going to say this. I do have an economics background. I'm going to say, I don't know. I think we're going to have to wait and see what the long-term effect is. And we also have to see how deep these policies go into effect, because Trump likes to make a storm as a negotiation tactic. So these tariffs could go away anytime now if he gets something he wants out of negotiation. That is how he's always been, even before he became president. So I'm not going to go and make a hasty statement of how it's going to be. I think initially, yeah, it's going to hurt Americans paying more for goods, but I don't really know what the long-term effect is.
Brandon, what do you think the long-term effects are going to be?
I think long-term effects will be positive. We've already had multiple trade deals essentially promised. Apple's promising $500 billion. Toyota is making another manufacturing plant. So we're already seeing some companies react to these tariff demands. And long-term, that's only going to be beneficial for us. And the more industries we could do that with, the better. Semiconductors, agriculture, automobiles, whatever it is. I'm all about the more isolationist we can be in America, the more things we could do in America, in my opinion, the stronger and better we are. We shouldn't be relying on other countries for trade when we have enough resources here in America to do pretty much everything we need to do.
I agree with him on that. I think that's going to provide more jobs for the working class, more jobs for all Americans. I've never voted for Trump. I've never been a supporter of Trump, but at the end of the day, I want him to succeed on this because I want America to succeed. I want people to have jobs. I want people to thrive and prosper. I don't want people to suffer just because I don't like Trump.
All right. Well, that was the last topic. You guys did great. You got any final words?
This is the first time I've been hopeful for a long time. The last 8 years were pretty rough, especially the last 4 years. So it does feel like some things are kind of getting back to normal. And I think it's great that we have the Gulf of America now. So,
okay. John?
I don't feel very optimistic about the state of politics, and it's not just about the Trump administration. I don't feel like, as a liberal, I don't feel like the Democratic Party really represents me either. So I'm hoping that we can become less divided as a nation and actually start doing things that help people.
I'm with you on that one. It'd be nice if we could just get maybe a new political party out there that represented the younger generation instead of these old dinosaurs.
No, I can agree with that, yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys. That was great. That's the end of Real Veteran News 45. Thanks for watching, and please watch next week. Bye.